Battle of Salamis. In September 480 BC, the Persian king Xerxes led his invasion force into Greece with a fleet of approximately 800 to 900 warships, the largest naval force the ancient world had assembled to that point in recorded history against a Greek allied fleet of roughly 370 triremes. Athens had already been captured and burned. The Acropolis was in Persian hands. The Spartans wanted to retreat and defend the Isthmus of Corinth. The Athenian general Themistocles understood that a defensive retreat would fragment the Greek coalition entirely, and that the only path to survival was a naval engagement, fought in conditions that would negate Persia's numerical advantage. He chose the Straits of Salamis, a narrow channel between the island of Salamis and the Athenian port of Piraeus, where the Persian fleet's size would become a liability rather than an asset. To force Xerxes to commit his fleet to the straits before the Greek coalition collapsed, Themistocles sent a secret message to the Persian king, warning him that the Greeks were planning to flee during the night and that he should move immediately to block both exits. Xerxes took the bait. He positioned himself on a throne on a promontory overlooking the straits to watch what he expected to be the destruction of the Greek fleet. Instead, he watched 300 of his own ships sunk, and more captured the Persian commanders, unable to maneuver in the narrow water, each ship's captain making individual decisions that contradicted those of the ships around them. More than 9,000 Persian sailors drowned or were killed by Greek crews who knew how to swim and how to finish a man in the water. The Greeks lost 40 ships. Xerxes retreated to Asia. The Persian invasion of Greece never recovered. The Battle of Salamis is considered by historians to be among the most consequential engagements in the history of Western civilization. The battle, whose outcome determined that Greece, and through Greece, Athens, and through Athens, the foundational institutions of Western democracy and philosophy would survive rather than be absorbed into the Persian Empire. Battle of Actium. On September 2nd, 34 BC, the future of the Roman world was settled in a single afternoon off the western coast of Greece. On one side, Mark Antony and Cleopatra commanding a fleet of approximately 500 warships, including massive Egyptian heavy galleys, backed by the resources of Egypt and the eastern provinces. On the other, Octavian commanding a fleet of lighter, more maneuverable Liburnian warships under the tactical genius of Marcus Agrippa. What made Actium different from a straightforward fleet engagement was that Antony's force was already disintegrating before the battle began. Months of blockade by Agrippa had strangled Antony's supply lines. Disease had killed thousands of his rowers, and many of his client kings had already switched sides. Antony's soldiers and officers were urging him to abandon the fleet and fight on land where his army was still formidable. He chose the sea. The battle began at midday, and for several hours, the two fleets were effectively stalemated. The heavier Antonian ships, difficult for the smaller Roman galleys to board or sink. Then Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships broke through the center of the battle and fled for Egypt, taking the war chest with them. Antony followed, abandoning his entire fleet and army. His remaining commanders, leaderless and betrayed, surrendered within days. Within a year, both Antony and Cleopatra were dead by their own hands. Octavian became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The Mediterranean world would not see another major naval challenge to Roman supremacy for generations. The Battle of Actium is the last great naval battle of the Roman Republic and the first great naval battle of the Roman Empire, the moment the Mediterranean became a Roman lake. Battle of Lepanto. On October 7th, 1571, the largest naval battle in the Mediterranean since antiquity was fought in the Gulf of Patras off western Greece between the Ottoman Empire and the Holy League, a coalition of Catholic states organized by Pope Pius V. The Ottomans had been expanding their naval dominance across the eastern Mediterranean for decades, capturing Cyprus the previous year and threatening to extend that dominance westward. The Holy League assembled a fleet of approximately 212 galleys and 6 galleasses, commanded by Don John of Austria, against an Ottoman fleet of approximately 278 galleys and 66 smaller vessels under Ali Pasha. Among the 12 920 soldiers aboard the Holy League fleet was Miguel de Cervantes, who would later write Don Quixote and who was wounded 3 times in the battle, losing the use of his left hand permanently, an injury he described as being worth it to have fought on the right side. The battle lasted approximately 4 hours. The Holy League sank or captured 210 of the Ottoman fleet's vessels. Ali Pasha was killed, his head displayed on a spike at the bow of his captured flagship. Approximately 30,000 Ottoman sailors and soldiers died. About 15,000 Christian galley slaves rowing under the Ottoman fleet in chains were freed and armed during the battle, contributing materially to its outcome. Lepanto shattered the Ottoman navy's aura of invincibility and halted the westward expansion of Ottoman naval power permanently, though the Ottomans rebuilt their fleet with remarkable speed, and the strategic consequences of the battle have been debated by historians ever since. What is not debated is the number of people who died in it. Battle of Trafalgar. On October 21st, 1805, Admiral Horatio Nelson led the British fleet against the combined Franco-Spanish fleet off Cape Trafalgar on the southwestern coast of Spain in an engagement that secured British naval supremacy for the following century and killed the man who achieved it. Nelson's tactical approach was deliberately unconventional. Rather than forming a traditional line of battle parallel to the enemy and exchanging broadsides, he attacked in two perpendicular columns aimed directly at the Franco-Spanish line, accepting a period of extreme vulnerability while his leading ships approached without being able to return fire in exchange for breaking the enemy line and creating a melee that his better trained and faster firing crews would dominate. The plan worked exactly as he anticipated. The combined fleet lost 22 ships, either sunk or captured. The British lost none. Approximately 4,400 Franco-Spanish sailors were killed and 2,500 wounded. British casualties were 440 dead and 250 wounded. Nelson himself was shot by a French sniper in the feeding top of the Redoutable at approximately 1:15 p.m. and died 3 hours later after being told the scale of his victory. His last recorded words were, "God and my country." He had instructed his officers before the battle that England expects that every man will do his duty, a signal hoisted from his flagship Victory that became one of the most famous phrases in British naval history. Nelson's body was preserved in a barrel of brandy for the voyage back to England. He was given a state funeral at St. Paul's Cathedral. No major naval power challenged Britain's control of the seas again for a generation. Battle of Tsushima. On May 27, 1905, the Russian Baltic Fleet completed a voyage of approximately 18,000 miles from the Baltic Sea to the Tsushima Strait, between Japan and Korea, arriving to meet the Japanese fleet under Admiral Togo Heihachiro after a journey that had taken 7 months and had already cost the fleet significant mechanical reliability. The voyage itself had nearly caused an international incident when Russian ships mistaking British fishing trawlers in the North Sea for Japanese torpedo boats opened fire on them, killing several British fishermen. At Tsushima, the result of the engagement was so one-sided, it barely merited being called a battle. In 2 days of fighting, the Russian fleet lost 21 of its 38 warships sunk, including all 8 of its battleships. 6 more were captured. Approximately 5,000 Russian sailors were killed and over 6,000 taken prisoner. The Japanese lost 3 torpedo boats and 117 men killed. The Russian commander, Admiral Rozhestvensky, was wounded, captured and later court-martialed, though acquitted. Tsushima was the first decisive naval victory by an Asian power over a European power in the modern era, a fact noted throughout Asia and by military observers worldwide. It contributed directly to the Russian Revolution of 1905 as the humiliation of the fleet added to the domestic political pressure on the Tsar's government. For Japan, Tsushima confirmed a sense of naval invincibility that would persist until Midway in 1942. The lessons the Japanese Navy drew from Tsushima, that superior gunnery, superior seamanship, and a decisive fleet engagement would determine naval outcomes, became so deeply embedded in Japanese naval doctrine that when American carrier aviation made those lessons obsolete, the Japanese fleet had difficulty adjusting to a form of warfare its doctrine had not anticipated as primary. Battle of Jutland. On May 31st, 1916, the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet clashed in the North Sea in the largest naval battle of the First World War, the only engagement in which both sides' main battle fleets fought each other directly. Roughly 250 British ships faced approximately 200 German ships in a battle that lasted through the night and into June the 1st. The British lost 14 ships, including 3 battlecruisers and 6,094 men. The Germans lost 11 ships and 2,051 men. In terms of ships and lives lost, Germany won the tactical engagement. In terms of strategic outcome, Britain won the war at sea. The German high seas fleet withdrew to port and never again sought a major engagement, leaving Britain's control of the North Sea effectively intact for the remainder of the war. The 3 British battlecruisers lost HMS Indefatigable, HMS Queen Mary, and HMS Invincible all exploded catastrophically within minutes of being hit, killing nearly all hands in each case because their turret design allowed flash fires to travel directly down from the gun turrets into the main magazine below. HMS Queen Mary's magazine detonated with approximately 1,266 men aboard. Fewer than 20 survived. Vice Admiral David Beatty, watching the explosions reportedly, turned to his flag captain and said, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." The magazine vulnerability had been identified and a solution existed: flash-tight doors between the turret handling rooms and the magazine. The modifications had not been applied to all ships before the battle because the Navy had not classified the risk as urgent enough to require immediate retrofitting across the entire fleet. The men of HMS Queen Mary and HMS Indefatigable died because a risk assessment had concluded the problem could wait, and then it couldn't. Battle of Midway. On June 4th, 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched an attack on the American-held Midway Atoll with a force of 4 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, and supporting vessels intending to draw out and destroy the remaining American carrier force. They did not know that American cryptanalysts had broken the Japanese naval code and that Admiral Chester Nimitz knew where the Japanese fleet would be, what route it would take, and what it planned to do. The Americans had 3 carriers waiting in ambush. The battle turned on 3 minutes. Japanese aircraft had just returned from attacking Midway and were being rearmed on the carrier decks with bombs and torpedoes. The hangars were open. Fuel lines were exposed. Munitions were stacked on the deck. At 10:22 in the morning, American dive bombers from USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown arrived directly overhead, having found the Japanese fleet by following the wake of a Japanese destroyer. Within 3 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagikaga and Soryu, were on fire beyond recovery. A 4th Hiryu was sunk later in the day. All 4 carriers, the core of the Japanese naval striking force that had attacked Pearl Harbor, were gone. Japan also lost 248 aircraft and approximately 3,000 men. The Americans lost USS Yorktown and approximately 362 men. Midway was the inflection point of the Pacific War, the moment Japan shifted from offense to defense. It was won because of intelligence, because of 3 minutes of uninterrupted dive bombing, and because the Japanese had broken their own doctrine by concentrating their carriers with insufficient fighter cover. Battle of the Coral Sea. On May 4th, 1942, the first naval battle in history in which neither fleet's surface ships sighted or fired directly on the other was fought entirely through carrier aircraft over the Coral Sea, northeast of Australia. The United States Navy intercepting Japanese plans to capture Port Moresby in New Guinea and establish air bases within range of Australia, positioned Task Force 17 to intercept the Japanese invasion fleet. Both sides lost a carrier. USS Lexington was sunk and USS Yorktown damaged. The Japanese lost the light carrier Shoho. In ship losses, Japan achieved a tactical victory. In strategic terms, the battle was an American victory. The Japanese invasion of Port Moresby was turned back, and the 2 Japanese fleet carriers damaged at Coral Sea Shikaku and Zuikaku were unavailable 1 month later at Midway, where their absence may have been decisive. Coral Sea established that carrier aviation had replaced the battleship as the primary weapon of naval warfare, a fact that Jutlandr had foreshadowed, but that Coral Sea confirmed definitively by producing a major naval engagement in which guns never fired, and the decisive weapon was the aircraft. The admirals who planned the battle from headquarters in Pearl Harbor and Rabaul were directing vessels hundreds of miles apart that they could not see through communications that were partially intercepted on both sides in a new kind of warfare that none of the pre-war naval doctrines of any nation had fully anticipated or planned for. Battle of Leyte Gulf from October 23rd to October 26, 1944. The largest naval battle in all of recorded history was fought in the waters surrounding the Philippine island of Leyte, as Japan made its final attempt to destroy the American naval forces supporting the invasion of the Philippines. The scale was unprecedented: 282 vessels and nearly 200,000 personnel on both sides spread across a battle area of more than 100,000 square miles in 4 separate but interconnected engagements. The Japanese plan, called Shogo, was audacious and acknowledged its own impossibility. A decoy force of carriers with almost no aircraft would lure the main American fleet northward under Admiral Halsey, while 2 powerful surface forces converged on the landing beaches at Leyte from the west through different passages. If successful, it would destroy the invasion. Halsey took the bait entirely, chasing the decoy carriers north and stripping the landing force of its heavy naval cover. The Japanese Central Force, including the Yamato and Musashi, the 2 largest battleships ever built, drove toward the landing beaches with almost nothing between them and the transports carrying American soldiers. What stopped them was one of the most extraordinary defensive actions in naval history: a group of small American escort carriers and their destroyer screens, outgunned by a factor of many multiples, charged directly at the approaching Japanese fleet, and fought with such ferocity that the Japanese commander, Vice Admiral Kurita, concluded he was facing a much larger force and turned back. The battle cost Japan 26 warships, including 4 carriers and 3 battleships, and approximately 10,500 men. The American fleet lost 6 ships and approximately 3,500 men. Leyte Gulf ended the Imperial Japanese Navy as an effective fighting force and introduced to naval warfare the organized kamikaze attack, in which pilots deliberately crashed their aircraft into American ships rather than drop conventional bombs. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments below.